Hi, and welcome to another narration, presented by yours truly, Cryptid's Roost. Please be so kind as to throat punch the like button and smack the arse of the subscription button as well. And remember to choke hold that notification bell and then select all. That way you'll receive all notifications each time I upload a new video. I would like to reach out and say a huge thank you to those of you who have been supporting Cryptid's Roost financially with your sponsorship. We pray the good Lord replenishes you abundantly, and to those of you who will, later on. We pray the good Lord bless you as you do so. And also a huge thank you to everyone for always supporting the channel with your likes, comments and shares as well. It is all very much appreciated. God bless you all. And why not hashtag cryptidsroost in your comments. So grab your coffee, sit back and enjoy the show. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not. Hand me down. I was an organ donor for my sick sister. She keeps coming back for more. This epic story is written by Brittlby, a wonderful author over on Reddit. If you would like to read more of their works, the Reddit link to their profile and their subreddit will be below in the description. My name is Elaine Hatcher. I was 11 years old when I killed my sister, and I have never killed again. A handful of medical examiners and a dozen psychiatrists all insisted that it was a tragic accident. Almost a foregone conclusion given how high the deck was stacked up against poor Abigail. My mother was the only one who knew. Of course, she couldn't have actually known, but her obsession with Abby, blended with the mother's intuition, pointed in the right direction, for once. I had planned the murder with my confederacy of stuffed animals. My favourite, Captain Crocodile, offered a silent approval, staring me down with his one remaining button eye as I recited every detail like a prison break. And in many ways, it was. Abby was born 3 years before me, a perfect little doll, coquettish with her pink cherub cheeks and golden blonde curls. She had a laugh that was infectious, my mother would say, whenever she could shove it into a conversation. By the time I'd come along, Abby rarely had a reason to laugh. The few times I'd heard it, it was a raspy thing that rattled around her dry lungs like a rat trying to escape a glue trap. It did feel infectious, but more in the way one might be quarantined if they lingered too long and too close around her. After her second birthday, the doctors diagnosed her with a grab bag of horrific allergies, autoimmune diseases and a genetic disorder that even now I couldn't pronounce correctly. Desperation drove my parents as they were informed what would be needed to keep their baby alive. When test after retest certified neither of them were compatible donors, they were staring down the barrel of the unthinkable. Their little angel was going to die. They needed a miracle, and when God wasn't forthcoming, they decided to make their own miracle. People tell me how horrible it is that I was bred for utility. They say I should be furious at my parents, but as I've already explained to you, whether I was born this way or from my mother's disparate treatment of me and my sister, I was a premeditated murderer by 11. If not a textbook sociopath, I am certainly adept at compartmentalizing my emotions. I cannot help but approach the whole matter with a clinical detachment. What would someone desperate to save their child not do? Torture a hypothetical child who wasn't even born yet? It was an easy choice. When it turned out I was a viable candidate, any chance I ever had of a loving family life evaporated. I don't often waste time brooding on what might have been, but I can't help but imagine what if I had been incompatible. Abby would have died, but nature abhors a vacuum. I would have grown into the hole she left in my parents' heart, and had a loving, if perhaps an overprotected childhood. Instead, I became the lifeline to Abigail. And how detached can a mother and father allow themselves to become to a child they would have to medically torture at regular intervals for spare parts? I'm surprised they took the risk of naming me, for fear it might breed attachment. Like naming a pig they'd have to slaughter once I was mature. I was kept on a strict diet. Poisons like sugar were absolutely out of the question. Medicine was another luxury I wasn't allowed, as it would lead to complications if Abby needed a piece of me. Playing outside was also a dead issue. At first, my mother's horrific tales of the dangers of the outdoors and other children served to keep me petrified of even trying to make friends. Eventually, I couldn't help noticing how much fun everyone had at recess while I hid in the nurse's office. Now, understand me when I say I didn't kill her because I didn't have friends, or I wasn't given cake on my birthday, or even because I was half-heartedly loved out of obligation. I am not a perfect person, but I am not petty. No, I had a much better reason. By the time I was 10, I had given bone marrow 3 times. Marrow extraction back then was excruciating. In a decade, I had given enough blood to fill a hot tub. That's not a euphemism. I did the math. Abby went into renal failure when I was 11. I had abandoned the childhood fear of needles after years in the hospital, but I was terrified of being put to sleep and having bits of me cut out. I had the audacity to mention these fears, and my mother looked at me like I was a poisonous insect for needing parental reassurance. It was then when I decided I was going to kill my sister. My mother slapped me, aghast at my selfishness. My father avoided the matter, washing his misgivings away with light beer. Too young to have a choice in what was to be done with my kidney, the operation happened swiftly. In the recovery with my sister, my surgical scar smouldering, I found the strength to follow through. Amongst Abby's more worrying issues was a severe strawberry allergy, and I'd smuggled in a small package of strawberry shortbread cookies into the hospital in my backpack. The cold tile on my soles was something to focus on rather than the pain in my side. 3 steps to my backpack taking an eternity, I held my breath during the pull of the zipper, careful not to wake any of the others in the recovery room. I never had the courage to buy cookies to sneak out for myself. It felt almost as blasphemous an act as murder. The scent of the shortbread was heavenly as I opened the package. Holding a cookie gingerly between my thumb and forefingers, it felt too light for something so deadly. I hid the bag in the biohazard bin for used needles and gauze before turning my attention to Abby. I broke the cookie in smaller pieces, just like Mother had taught me when feeding Abby, and her eyes only opened as I was slipping the 3rd piece between her pale lips. She fought, of course, but even 2 years older than me, she was bedridden more often than not. I kept my hand clamped over her face as she struggled weakly. Her eyes reddened and rolled back into their sockets as her windpipe swelled. I was back in bed and she was gone before the nurse had a chance to respond to the alarm. The staff simply shrugged their shoulders at the pale corpse. Maybe they were complacent given her litany of conditions. It wasn't an unexpected tragedy, or perhaps they never dug too deeply into post-operative deaths, given the legal repercussions that could stem from them. Regardless, they refused to humour my mother's insistence upon an autopsy. Even my typically useless father found himself forced to step in as his wife accused me over and over again of killing her daughter. I won't bore you with the long version of the next 10 years. Skimming the highlights, there was a divorce. My mother got visitation, which she never used beyond an occasional sobbing phone call, during which she lobbed accusations at me. Eventually, this proved too little of a reason to linger in this world of pain, and she killed herself. My father mourned the loss of his daughter to illness and his wife to madness by flirting with alcoholism. But nature abhors a vacuum, and soon he was remarried and I had the happy childhood I'd always heard about. Happiness and security has always felt strange to me, like a favourite shirt that has been shrunk in the dryer. I enjoyed it, but it never felt comfortable. I had almost managed to stop thinking about murdering my sister until high school. It felt like any other Tuesday when I hopped out of my friend's car as she dropped me off. More of an acquaintance than a friend, Nancy's only real value to me was access to her dad's sun-bleached Jeep. Nancy was the only one of my friends who had a car, and so I took care to stay in her good graces. I opened the mailbox, and aside from a magazine for my stepmother, it was empty, except for a package of strawberry shortbread cookies. I pulled them out of the box, suddenly sick as the package crinkled merrily up at me as I recognised them. "What have you got there?" Nancy asked, always eager to stick her nose in other people's business. I numbly held up the bag and her eyes lit up. "Wow! I thought they stopped making those years ago. Those were my mom's favourites. You know, I thought you didn't like sweets." I didn't. After years without, I had never managed to develop a taste for sugar, and even if I had, I'd sooner eat glass than the shortbread. Taking my silence for acquiescence, as she often did, Nancy snatched them from my hand, and I watched them vanish into her purse like a magic trick. "Great! My mom will love them. Later, hooker. I'll pick you up at 7:30-ish. Her dad's Jeep sputtered off, leaving me with the newest copy of Homes and Gardens and my thoughts. They came in an unwelcome flood, none of them particularly useful. Who could possibly know? Why would they come for me after all this time? Why not go to the police if they had any proof? After turning the thoughts over and over and again, there was only one thing I knew for certain. That lying bitch Nancy wasn't going to give those cookies to her mom. I tried to push the worries aside, insisting to myself that it was nothing. Like the narrator in The Telltale Heart, I wondered if maybe I'd subconsciously done it. Prior to my mother, there was no history of mental illness in my family, but after 5 years of therapy, the most plausible theory was that I'd somehow done it to myself as an expression of unaddressed guilt. I'd lied to my therapists, of course, but I definitely picked up some of the lingo. Once again, my skill at compartmentalising came in handy, and by the time dinner had rolled around, I'd already put the whole thing into a tidy little box that I shoved way in the back corner of my mind, in favour of watching a few episodes of Ghost Adventures. It wasn't until the next morning, when Nancy didn't show up, that I grew concerned. A stranger answered when I called their house after 8, their voice clipped and officious. They asked my name, and I could hear a brief exchange between them, the man and Nancy's mother. I was briefly questioned as one of the last people who had seen her before the murder. I told them everything about the afternoon except about the shortbread. Her parents insisted that she had been completely normal at dinner, and they couldn't imagine who would have any kind of grudge. The tidbits I got from the newspaper and Nancy's bereaved mother painted a picture of someone truly deranged. The killer had done so much damage to the body that the service had to be closed casket. Large pieces of the victim still missing, as if the killer had taken them as trophies. It was hard to separate the truth from high school exaggerations, but they claimed her lower jaw had been ripped out. The only thing that nagged me, as the police questioned me, I noticed was a picture on the whiteboard. Outside Nancy's second-story window was a partial footprint. A ruler was held next to the muddy footprint to show the scale in the photo. It was a children's sneaker size. The distorted mud impression of Pikachu's face smiling from between the treads. I recognised them immediately because I had a pair once, and they'd been given to little Abigail when I outgrew them. I managed to suppress the idea before it could germinate. After all, how many millions of pairs of those shoes were made? It wasn't hard for me to forget. After all, there were a number of more viable theories beyond some killer leaving me cookies and stealing my dead sister's shoes to punish me half a decade later. And so I had no real cause to dwell on it. The killer never struck again, and the investigation led to no suspects or further leads. It was another 5 years before I was reminded of poor Nancy and poor Abby. Senior year of college. Nestled in my campus P.O. box, next to a flyer for a campus fundraiser, was a green package of shortbread. I could feel the icy rush of adrenaline in my veins. My throat dry as I pulled them out of the box. I wish I could say that I kept it together, but I did not. Frantic, I started yelling at the sophomore behind the post office window. She said she didn't know where they'd come from, and she wasn't sure how it ended up in my box. Angrily, I shoved them under the slot of her kiosk, snarling, "I don't want any of that crap in my mailbox." As unhinged as I was, the mousy young girl fidgeted with her glasses nervously and seemed to decide that no response was the best response. I had trouble calming myself that night, even borrowing a cigarette from my roommate. A chronic non-smoker, I was violently ill and still no closer to sleep. With the taste of mouthwash covering the bile, I went back out to the balcony for some fresh air. Across the dorm complex, however, I could make out the flashing lights from emergency vehicles. My knee-jerk reaction was to go see what had happened, but even though I was shaky from the post office, I knew better than to make myself a suspect. The next few weeks unfurled like reading a mystery novel I had already skipped to the end of. I wasn't particularly surprised to find that there was a murder, nor was I shocked upon discovering the poor mousy girl in spectacles that I'd yelled at was the victim. Her name was Amanda. Some small guilty voice inside me made certain that I at least did her the courtesy of learning her name. The assault was very much the same MO as whoever had killed Nancy, but with 2 states and 5 years between the murders, the police didn't connect them. Brutally savaged, the victim missing limbs and organs. Amanda's roommate was traumatised to the point she insisted she couldn't tell them anything about the killer. I waited 2 months before approaching her. She wasn't particularly forthcoming, not that I expected she would be. I had to get a few drinks into her before the dam burst. Amanda's roommate had been particularly forthcoming with the police and had not gotten a good look at the killer. With a few margaritas in her, she was more willing to elaborate on what not gotten a good look meant. She said in the darkness her eyes were playing tricks on her. The shape on top of Amanda stank like dry leather and strawberry, and it turned to look straight at her. Even twisted and rotten, she could still tell that the killer's face was small like a child's. It laughed like a little girl too. The innocent tinkling of bells on a playground made perverse and unnatural in the darkness as it mauled Amanda. Amanda's roommate vomited cheap tequila out to the window of my Volvo as we came back on campus. I had only one myself, but I could still feel my gorge rising. The only halfway rational thing I could think to do was visit Abby's grave the next weekend. It looked to me as if perhaps the dirt had been disturbed, but it had been almost 3 months and I was hardly an expert. Besides which, the dead don't rise from the grave. I decided to take a page from Sherlock Holmes and eliminate the impossible. Whatever remained, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. Detaching myself from the situation, I had to admit that I was a prime candidate for some kind of mental imbalance. But even if that was the case, I wasn't going to turn myself in. I rationalised that the next time I snubbed myself a package of cookies, I would just have to take steps to keep myself from going out and performing the unspeakable. I didn't allow myself to feel guilty, however. How do you apologise for something you don't remember ever doing? Another 5 years passed, and I scarcely worried about the matter, my unhealthy mental state giving me a gift of willful ignorance. I graduated, got a job, got an apartment, bought a dog, and eventually met someone. I liked her quite a lot, though I might stop short of saying I loved her. I was far too broken to ever say that word and mean it. But over the last 3 years, she had wormed her way into my life in such a way that I was very appreciative of her and the ways she made life better. Terry would run her fingers through my hair and put me to sleep when I was too manic to stop working. She would remember the myriad of social obligations we shared and did her best to keep them to a minimum, knowing how tiring it was for me to deal with people. And so, in my own way, I was quite content. But as always, it never felt entirely comfortable or right. Sure enough, it was a cold night in autumn when I checked my mail and found the package inside. Strawberry shortbread. I was 26 years old and I had had 5 long years to plan in the back of my head what I was going to do. That night I made dinner and shared the couch with Terry, watching a couple of episodes of one of her brainless cooking shows. I had rationalised that the previous deaths had been people I had given the tainted snack to, and so, when the time came for bed, I set the unopened package on my bedside table next to my bottled water and alarm clock. When your opponent is your own mind, it seemed pretty stupid for anyone to try and outsmart themselves. I hoped my subconscious was as rational as I was, and if it didn't mark anyone with the snacks, then maybe nothing would happen. Or maybe, with a misplaced sense of justice, I would snuff myself out. I woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of something outside our bedroom balcony. We were on the 14th floor, and it wasn't unheard of for the pigeons to make themselves at home on the railing, but not usually this close to winter. I sat up in bed and could see through the sliding glass door that there was a lone pigeon clattering across the rail, cooing dully. I turned my head to confirm that Terry was still asleep. She was snoring softly, a lock of hair rising and falling above her lips. I settled back when I caught sight of something else on the balcony. It clutched the railing, fingers grey and twisted. I had a hard time recognising it at first until I noticed the bright yellow nail polish. Even though the nails were cracked and worn from age, I knew Nancy had been wearing the same shade 10 years ago when she dropped me off. The thing pulled itself up slowly, mismatched body parts causing it to sway with an unnatural shamble, backlit by the city lights. I could see she still had the blonde, dollish hair I remembered when I had killed her. Abby turned her face to the side, Nancy's lower jaw jutting out from her rotting face, like a bulldog as she opened her mouth wide. My mother had been right. Abby's laughter was infectious. A warm little girl's cackle escaped the maw of the rotting creature as she pressed a hand against the glass. A streak of rot and viscera trailed behind as she slid her fingers towards the door latch. One eye was milky blue and sightless, but the other was a dark hazel I recognised from the poor girl at the campus post office. The eye was focused on me, Abby's breath steaming against the glass despite her being dead 15 years now. As the dry autumn air rushed in through the open door, I could smell old rot and strawberries. My old scar began to sting like it was fresh from the operation table the night I had gotten out of bed. Earlier that day I had rationalised that I was ready to die if that was what my guilty conscience demanded. But as Abby staggered across the room on mismatched legs, leaving her sticky grey footprint on my carpet, I knew I would never let that undead bitch have another inch of me. Her head twitched like a nervous bird, watching me with her good eye as I tore open the bag of shortbread and snatched out a broken fistful of them. Terry woke up to me trying to force feed her gooey crumbs and the sight of Abby creeping even closer. Her reaction was typical, flailing as she tried pushing me away. I pried her mouth open and shoved the shortbread past her lips. Terry bit me as I pulled my fingers back, but it didn't deter me while I gripped her by the shoulders and slammed her against the back of the bed until she swallowed the shortbread so she could gasp for air. She looked at me as if I was a mad woman, but as Abby snapped her attention from me over to Terry, she seemed to realise the danger wasn't over, even though I'd let her go. Terry's skin sizzled and split open like a blister as the corpse of my sister touched her, tracing her fingernails across her abdomen. I moved off of the bed when Terry reached out for me, but I didn't turn away. I felt I owed her that much. It took almost an hour for Abby to strip away every bit of Terry that she craved. Impossibly, Terry survived the whole ordeal, only passing away after Abigail removed her rotting claws and took a step away. The milky blue eye had been replaced by Terry's fresh green one, and it swiveled towards me, full of accusations. I wasn't sure if it was Terry or Abby who was doing the accusing at that point, but as the corpse retreated back towards the balcony, I called the police. After hanging up, I threw myself around the room a bit, hoping to make the case that I was attacked as well. I was so thorough that I was told the killer had given me a mild concussion and cracked 2 ribs. Just like the medical examiners at my sister's murder, to them I was a wounded bird and somehow beyond suspicion. I've received a package twice more since then. I gave one to a panhandler on the way to work and another to a woman who struck up a conversation with me on the subway. No one ever connected Nancy and Terry, but I did not want to push my luck. Now I chose Abby's victims as people that have no ties to me. I don't think that makes me a bad person. It's important that you understand, circumstances make monsters of us all, but there is nothing more human than survival. Would you choose someone to suffer horribly in your place? My mother was right. It's an easy choice. My name is Elaine Hatcher. I was 11 years old when I killed my sister, and I have never killed again. Don't forget, if you enjoyed that story, be sure to pop over to the author's Reddit profile and drop them a line, or even give them a glowing review. I'm sure they really would appreciate it. The link to their Reddit profile will be below in the description. Please be so kind as to throat punch the like button and smack the ass of the subscription button as well. And remember to tap the notification bell and then select all. That way you'll receive all notifications each time I upload a new video. Oh, and don't forget to share the video far and wide. This will all help with YouTube's algorithm and will help to promote this channel more. And don't forget to check out the merch store. The link will be in the description and also in the video thumbnail. And if you would like an honourable mention, send in a snapshot of yourself with your purchase and I'll feature it in one of the videos. I now have my very own subreddit community where you can submit any stories you've written. You can submit your stories or encounters either there or send them to cryptidsroost@gmail.com. If you wish to remain anonymous, that's fine with me. All the links are below. I also have a Facebook group, Twitter, Reddit, and you'll also find me on Discord. If you would like to support this channel and help make it grow, my PayPal is paypal.me/cryptidsroost. Again, that will also be below.